Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew: Keith Johnson
What you call God, I call wormhole aliens.
and Veronica Dashel.
Hi. Those of you listening can't see this, but I have a Rakajino mug, and I just realized it's the exact same color as my shirt, so you probably can't see it if you're watching. So,
Well, for the folks who are watching, there you go. There you go.
Double strong, double sweet, right?
yes, a Moscato is definitely double strong, double sweet.
Moscato Gino.
Yes.
All right, and we're back. And Alan couldn't join us today, but we've got a little bit of news. The big one, I guess, is that Michelle Yeoh won the Golden Globe for Best Actress for her role in Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yay, as she should. That was amazing. There was like all these different characters she had to play in the same movie that were the same person but not. So I always love when you see actors do that in the same movie.
And often the people who win the Golden Globe will be sort of front runners to win the Academy Award. So she's a front runner right now to win the Academy Award for Best Actress. Now, it's not a guarantee, but the odds are in her favor, which is great for her. I mean, she's put the work in over 40 years, and it's great to see her getting her due.
Yes.
If you see her going back to, what was it? Was it actually called Heroic Trio, one of her earlier movies? She was in like that martial arts demon movie. Of course, some people in America first really came to know her in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Right. And for so long, people thought of her as kind of like this kick-ass martial artist kind of person. She was one of the, you call him a Bond woman, but you can't really call her a Bond woman because she was one of the first ones who was a secret agent on his level. She's just an amazing actress. I've always liked her. I even like her playing the snooty mother in Crazy Rich Asians.
She was hilarious.
Have you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once yet?
I have not, and it's absolutely on my list.
It's good. It's a very imaginative movie, and she's great in it.
Hot dog fingers. I know I keep hearing about that.
That's right. That's right. And now, Tanya Giles, who's the chief programming officer at Paramount Streaming, told TV Line at a Television Critics Association press tour event that there have been conversations about the Section 31 series, affirming it is still in development. I don't know how. I mean, she's hard to pin down and get scheduled now.
Yes.
After a Golden Globe, after potentially an Academy Award. I mean, I don't see how her schedule is going to free up any. I mean, I would love to see her back. I've always said I'm not wild about the Section 31.
Same here.
And I would rather she was playing Captain Georgiou than Emperor Georgiou.
Yeah.
But I mean, Michelle Yeoh is a powerhouse, and if they can get her on Star Trek, get her on Star Trek.
Yeah, I'd love to see like Michelle, Captain Georgiou, like pre-Burnham.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I agree with you, Charles.
Have to deal with any of the current universe because all that's in the future. You wouldn't have to deal with that at all whatsoever.
Yeah,
of course they would. They'd have somewhere like Sulu's grandfather or something was her original captain or admiral or something. I don't know. That's what they do.
I agree with you, Charles. I really don't want to see. I don't want to see a Section 31 series. Although, of course, I know it'd be great, and she's a great actress. And simply because I know what people have said, it's actually one of those where, to me, they're going to the well a little bit one time too many, because Section 31 is introduced in Deep Space Nine. Was literally this incredible clandestine organization that no one knew about. And I know what some people say is, well, things happen and records got lost, but only 100 years later to have it as an organization that literally had fleets of starships and badges. For some reason, the badges irritates me more than anything else. It's like having a secret code word or clubhouse. It's too much for me. It ruins what Section 31 was supposed to be in the future. But it's Michelle Yeoh, so if she does it, I'm not going to go, well, I ain't going to watch it out of spite.
Right.
Because it's Michelle Yeoh.
I had the thought, too, and I posted this on the group, that, I mean, they've had so much trouble getting a Star Trek movie off the ground. Yeah. Like, just take your Georgiou ideas and make a movie out of it and get Michelle Yeoh to star in the movie. I mean, I think that would be great.
I feel like that would be a much better use of her time as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, but great for her. I mean, did you see her acceptance speech? It was funny.
Shut up.
I can beat you up.
Yes, that was awesome.
Yeah. So congratulations to Michelle Yeoh. Now, you had some news items as well. Is that right?
Yeah, this is kind of like the Section 31 thing where it's not really the rumor mill, but I think in Hollywood it's important, not sometimes not when you say something is definitely going to happen, but when you say
Mhm.
it's definitely when you can definitely say it's still being thought about. Because sometimes it's just dead. Dead is dead. And if it's not dead, there's still hope. And recently there have been discussions with interviews with both Patrick Stewart and other people behind Picard who are sent, Alex Kurtzman, most importantly, who says that they have discussed doing a season 4 of Star Trek Picard.
Mm.
Now, the reason that's significant is you may know that Patrick Stewart didn't want to do any Star Trek Picard when he was first
Right.
approached a few years ago. He was like, I don't know if there's anything else to say. I don't know if I want to put the energy back into a series like that. And then now, of course, he's gotten into it. And what I think I love is this is the same Patrick Stewart when he first started The Next Generation, who simultaneously didn't know if he was going to last on the show and if he wanted to last on the show.
Right.
And I think he was one of the ones, like along with Michael Dorn, who kind of lived out of like a suitcase, in his case, literally, because he didn't know if the show was going to last. And then he came to love it. And he even acknowledged that his personality changed when he was with The Next Generation. He said, by his own admission, he was kind of a stuffy, stereotypical Shakespearean trained British actor, and he learned to relax because of TNG and the cast, and he loved it. And I think it's amazing that he didn't want to do Picard. Now he's done 3 seasons, and he is looking at a 4th. And what he actually said in talking to Variety, Patrick Stewart said that the show, as ending the 3rd season, leaves the door open for more of the Next Generation and crew. And Stewart said he would be interested provided the show can maintain the work quality of the first 3 seasons. Alex Kurtzman, the same thing, said that we're not closing the door after the 3rd season. And given that Patrick Stewart is still interested, we are definitely talking about it. Now, that is by no means saying a 4th season has been greenlit, but it's kind of cool that they're not saying this is, that there's no chance of a 4th season.
Yeah, my first thought when you were reading that, given that they've been talking about 3 seasons and done for years now, and now all of a sudden before it debuts, they're talking about, well, maybe 4th. I'm up for it. Makes me think Picard's gonna die, and they're trying to avoid the spoilers.
No.
They're trying to make it a surprise. Uh-oh, I lost your audio, Keith.
Sorry, coming in.
Nope, you're cut off
Nope.
again. You said, okay, coming in, and then it's gone.
Right. Well, I mean, they're talking about, maintaining the quality of the first 2 seasons. Back. Hey, great. Right. And, I mean, for me, the first 2 seasons have been very much a mixed bag.
That's
so I feel
like
confident.
Maintaining the quality. I'm like...
I feel like I feel like they can do that. I feel like that's an achievable goal.
Yep.
So good for them for setting achievable goals.
Yes.
Yes, right.
I'm hopeful for season 3. I made sort of a snarky comment on my own Facebook page that surely Lucy won't pull the football out this time. You know what I mean? Right. So I'm going in optimistic again for Picard season 3, and hopefully I'll, there's a lot that I like in the first 2 seasons, and there's a lot that I don't like. So hopefully it'll be stronger this time.
Same here.
And then we had a comment from our fan Fanny Beth Glenn, who said it wouldn't be the worst thing to let a character have a well-planned death that serves a story. True. Yeah. Not really the Star Trek way, but it's something they could do for a change.
They're like, we want to get rid of this actress.
Yeah, usually it depends on negotiations with the actors, and then they agree to come back, and suddenly they're alive again.
Yes. One more bit of news real quickly. Back in 2021, I don't know if you guys remember reading this talk about the Boston Museum of Science had talked about plans to develop a memorial honoring Leonard Nimoy. And what the Boston Museum of Science was going to do was literally a 20-foot hand in the live long and prosper symbol, the famous Vulcan salute symbol. And they made a big announcement about it and saying they want to do this to honor Leonard Nimoy. And one of the things they did was they actually did a crowdfunding program. Well, going on a year, almost 2 years later, they didn't really have the money. They didn't make the money that they expected. And I guess given the economic times and time of COVID, I kind of understand that.
Yeah, that was not a good time to do that.
Right. But now a gentleman named Rich Miner, who's one of the co-developers of the Android operating system and is a huge Trekkie, has recently donated $600,000 to the project. Now they had a crowdfunding goal of 500,000, and he donated 600,000. So they just announced that, hey, guess what? The Live Long and Prosper project is back on.
Rich Miner sounds like a placeholder name for like a villain in a Western.
It does, doesn't it?
Which, no offense, Mr. Miner. Thank you for your contribution. Sorry if you're listening.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty neat. So they said they're going to go forward on that, and they're going to again. It's going to be a 20-foot hand in the Vulcan salute, and then inside they'll have some stuff honoring Leonard Nimoy stuff. And I thought that was just really kind of a cool thing that they're going to be able to go forward with that.
Yeah, I like the Star Trek-y take on that. Yeah, I like that. You know, that angle. But I worry because I mean, he got that Vulcan salute. He observed it during a Jewish religious practice when he was a child.
Right.
And he always said that, you know, that you're not supposed to look and it's not supposed to be something that people see. So
exactly.
I'm not knowledgeable enough about the Jewish faith to know if that's like blasphemous or something to have like a giant Vulcan salute or not. So hopefully not. But that'd be my only concern there.
I think he modified it very slightly, right? Or did he? It's not exactly the same, right? It's very modified.
That is my understanding. Is he modified?
Yeah. Okay.
It.
Well, hope so. Because I'm certainly not knowledgeable enough to be an authoritative source on this. So I'm just thinking out loud.
Same here.
Talking out my you know what.
And then quickly, I got just a couple of history things I want to throw out real fast.
Okay.
I every now and then I'll do a birthday that I think is relatively important because you could spend your time doing birthdays, but I thought this is rather important. January 11th, 1923, we celebrate the birthday of one Jerome Bixby.
Hey. I love Jerome Bixby.
Yeah, that's an important name because Jerome Bixby, among all the other things he did, wrote 4 episodes in the original series. And those were The Day of the Dove, which is the one with the Klingons and that crazy entity that was making everybody in the ship kill each other. They would stab each other and they'd come back and keep fighting. By Any Other Name, which I can never avoid the opportunity to say is one of my most strange Star Trek episodes because I feel the first half is awesome and then at the end it disappoints me. But that's one where the Kelvins are basically going to take over the Enterprise. Requiem for Methuselah, the one with they meet Flint, previously immortal human, and you know the big one he wrote, of course,
Mirror Mirror.
Mirror Mirror, right?
Yep. And if you only ever watch, I'm sorry, go ahead. I jumped right in your sentence.
No, go ahead, Charles.
I was gonna say if you only watch one thing written by Jerome Bixby, watch The Man from Earth.
Yes.
Not the Man from Earth 2.
No.
Yes.
Just The Man from Earth.
Yes.
Agreed.
Or see the play because the play is very good as well.
The stage play version is very good too. Yeah.
He's also wrote the script for the film that became The Fantastic Voyage, the really cool one. You remember when they shrunk down the ship inside the man's body? And he also wrote one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, which is It's a Good Life, with the little evil boy Anthony that has the powers and is keeping the town hostage.
That's right.
Was that movie where they shrunk the ship down and put it in a human body? Was that a Disney movie thing? Because I remember a ride like that at Disney, and I always called it the Body Ride, and that made me think of it. I
don't remember if that was a Disney movie or not.
I don't think so. I remember the Asimov adaptation more than the movie because he fixed it.
And 2 more history things. On this date, January 12th, 1968, an original series episode that went on to become kind of famous for comedy premiered, and that was A Piece of the Action.
Hey,
which is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's a great one.
It's a great episode. It's a silly show. It's a comedy. It gave us that crazy game. Was it Fizbin that Kirk created on Tuesday? And also, interestingly, as goofy and silly as the show was, it's a Prime Directive episode. Because everything started because one starship a century before left one book about Chicago gangs in the 1920s before the Prime Directive, and that entire planet copied it, which I still think is kind of wild.
yeah, it's a fun episode though. I love that one.
Yeah, and the last thing is on this day, on January 14th in 2000 and I lost the date. But January 12th was the first day of filming of what has actually become the most maligned of the new Star Trek movies, which is Star Trek Into Darkness. And I find it funny because as someone who doesn't love the Abrams verse / Kelman's verse movies, I don't hate In the Darkness because I think my expectations are already low. Like I despise the Khan in that thing. I despise everything about Khan. I despise beaming to the Klingon homeworld from Earth and stuff. But because I wasn't loving that universe, I don't hate it as much as some people like. They truly, truly hate it. What did y'all think about In the Darkness?
I liked it until it went off the rails. I have very specific opinions about that movie. I think we need to do an episode about that though, and really get into Darkness when we have time to discuss it, because there's a lot of pros and cons about that movie. I think in a lot of ways it's overrated, and by some people it's or underrated, and by some people it's overrated. So I think you know, I think that we should do a whole episode about that at some point.
Yeah,
sounds good.
I enjoyed it.
Okay,
but cool. I didn't like love it.
Okay.
It was my least favorite of the JJ verse.
Okay.
Yeah. That's this week in Trek history.
Well, great. Now, if you're listening on the audio podcast, we're going to take a quick break to promote a fellow ESO Network podcast show. But stay right there, because we're going to be coming right back to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yay!
And if you're watching with us live, we're going to go right into Deep Space Nine. And I guess, Veronica, you don't need to do a spoiler warning. I think it's probably enough time has passed.
Also, for those of you listening, I just stuffed a chocolate banana bread thing into my mouth. So
yeah.
It's hard to do.
I ate dinner before the show. I just want to point that out.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm kind of sneaking it in because my sugar was dropping, and I got to keep that.
No, you're fine. Go right ahead.
I have a question. In our Facebook group, Charles, you published an article, an item about the anniversary of Deep Space Nine, and you asked, were you watching then? And I forget. I know, Veronica, you weren't, but Charles, were you watching when it first premiered?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I was watching. I remember the first time I saw a trailer for Deep Space Nine, or a preview on TV. And see, DS9 debuted 30 years ago this month, which means I would have been 12 when it debuted. I would have been 11 probably seeing this preview. And I remember asking my dad, we saw the preview, and I said, is this a new Star Trek movie, or is this a new Star Trek TV show? And he was like, I don't know. Because he didn't know, because back then you didn't know things.
Or there was internet, but it was not.
And I remember watching the premiere, and my biggest memory from watching the premiere is that scene when they're fishing at the lake. And my dad said, I bet they're on the holodeck. And then they were, and I was like, wow, like he got that, like he's really smart. Now watching it as an adult, it's pretty obvious that they're on the holodeck. Yeah. I was 12, I just turned 12. So I watched DS9 from the very beginning. And I know a lot of folks had trouble with the first season of DS9, but me being a 12-year-old who loves Star Trek, I didn't. At that point, Star Trek could be good, it could be bad. I didn't care. I just love Star Trek,
Right.
First season episodes like Babel and the one with Tosk. I just forgot. The Hunted, maybe. I can't remember the name of it, but the one with Tosk.
Oh yeah.
That was a great one.
Like those, like really stick out in my mind as ones that really jumped out to me at that age.
I think DS9. Sorry, Keith, because I barely remember to say things. I think of all the Star Trek first seasons, I feel like DS. I don't remember saying this before. I feel like it has the most good episodes.
Really?
Yeah.
Outside of the original series, right?
Outside of the original
all the
series.
Star Trek first seasons, you think DS9 has the most good episodes?
Yes.
Okay. Is that including the current series?
Ooh.
Oh, but you mean if you bring in Strange New Worlds?
Strange New Worlds or Prodigy or Lower Decks, they all had strong seasons.
Okay, I'm talking about 90s Trek.
Okay. So you think so you're basically saying you think the first season of DS9 is better than the first season of Next Gen or Voyager.
And Enterprise and Discovery.
Okay.
Sorry, Discovery.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think the biggest struggle they had in the first season of DS9 was that they were trying to figure out what the show was.
Yeah,
they're using like leftover Next Gen scripts and
absolutely
bringing back do a Q and Waxana episode, things that were sort of mainstays on Next Gen that just didn't fit into the DS9 thing, and they had to sort of figure out what DS9. But I think by the end of the first season, when you start getting like Duet and In the Hands of the Prophets, I think they found it.
They found it a lot faster than the others.
And that one where I'm blanking on titles today, but that one where the farmer didn't want to move off the moon, Brian Keith, and I love that one. That and the episodes like that where they really found their groove and started figuring out what it's interesting though. You can watch them figuring out what DS9 is, and probably some battles behind the scenes as far as what it should be,
Absolutely. Because did you stay with it, Charles? Did you watch the entire 7-year run?
I watched all the way through DS9, and I was a great age for DS9.
That is amazing, because you know what? I actually didn't stay with it. And it was because of what Veronica was just saying. The first season didn't turn me off, but I felt like there was too much retread. It was too much like next gen. And there was a lot of stuff going on in my life, so I didn't dislike it, but I started finding gaps. And I missed a lot of the first and a lot of the second season, and then I think I picked back up around the third season. So I actually had to kind of catch it more in reruns. So I can't say I watched it 100% new run, but like you said, there was, I think, one episode where you talked about retrod TNG plots. There was one that I really don't like, and it's that crazy one where there's that one village on Bajor, which for some reason has this incredible magical creature that nobody else on the planet has. You know what I'm talking about?
Is it the storyteller or the
Like
remember that the one where Bashir has to become the shaman guy, and
that's the one that I probably watched like twice, maybe 3 times, because Chuck doesn't want to ever watch it.
I guess O'Brien had to be the shaman guy. What did I say?
Bashir was an evil guy.
Yeah, the one where Bashir's an evil guy is also terrible.
It's just so weird because it is.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's what the cloud monster, and they have to go, the village is strong, the village is together. And I'm like, what the hell? Because it's like this weird magic thing on this planet where you don't see anything else like that. And it doesn't have anything to do with the prophets of the far race.
Right. Yeah. It's
like until you were talking about it, because I had no connection of that. That was Bajor planet.
Yeah, that was on Bajor. That wasn't even just a planet. That was on Bajor.
Right. So it really did sneak out. Y'all, and you guys are talking about, is it called The Passengers? That's the one where with the famous line where they said, when they asked Bashir, what is your name? And he goes, Rayo Vantica. Is that the one where the guy keeps jumping from body to body? And
Bashir talks really slowly
to
be evil. And it's just, it's kind of painful to watch. Sorry, Sid. We love you.
Yes.
But that's not the
Sid is amazing.
Yeah.
Love him to death. That was a terrible episode. Not his fault.
I think it's so funny because what you're saying is so interesting. It's because they had so little faith, and I don't mean faith like they thought it was a bad show, but they were so scared that DS9 couldn't stand on its own. And now some of the stuff they're worried about to us seems silly. I remember the message boards. They had message boards and conversations in the comic book store and articles I'd read in trade mags that would say, how can this show succeed? Because it's about a space station that doesn't go anywhere. You remember there was that whole thing again. It doesn't go anywhere. And there was a lot of people who literally predicted a failure simply because it, quote unquote, didn't go anywhere.
Which is baffling because almost every other TV show doesn't go anywhere. Look at I Lucy.
There's whole shows that don't even. There's whole shows where they don't even leave Earth.
and they completely misinterpreted the concept of Star Trek. Now, I from stories I've actually read, it wasn't really Gene Roddenberry who pitched Wagon Train to the Stars. It was actually one of the other people like Gene Kuhn or somebody. But the whole point was, if you talk about Wagon Train to the Stars, you travel around. Well, what was one of the most popular shows in TV history? Gunsmoke, which takes place in a town where they never went anywhere because people come to you. And that's so it's so funny. But the reason I say all that is because they did so many things that in hindsight look kind of silly. Like they look like when O'Brien left the Enterprise, they specifically had Picard walk him down. And he goes, "This is your favorite transporter room, isn't it? Transporter room number 3." And he beams O'Brien off, and then a whole thing where Picard gives orders to Cisco. I mean, it makes for great drama, but at the same time, it's kind of weird how they're kind of sort of shoehorning the Next Generation folks, or Patrick Stewart specifically, in because they really wanted you to know that, hey, remember, this is also Star Trek. And you're right, the episode with Q, for example, they were really like, okay, we got to get Q in here because everybody loves Q, and they'll watch the show. It's also probably the worst Q episode outside the second with those horrible animal things in Next Generation.
Right.
Only good for the line, "You hit me, Picard never hit me." But other than that, I hate that episode with Q. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's one of the great Q episodes.
Well, I think it's fun to see Q because he wasn't ever on DS9 again. You know, so I think that it's like the novelty of it. I think it's fun to see Hugh interacting with
That's
Sisko.
true.
But I mean, as far as like Patrick Stewart, I thought like involving again having Sisko's backstory involve the Locutus battle, I thought was great. I think that still works really well. It sort of puts him right into that lore.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of nice. I mean, and it's kind of ballsy to have, you know, Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard, the very successful show that's so successful it's getting a spinoff. And basically the new commander comes aboard and is like, screw you.
Yeah.
You know,
I will say that I feel a little manipulated in that scene, but I would agree with you because I will say that they established real fast Avery Brooks can stand toe to toe because
yes,
when I never forget the line is when Picard is talking to him and everything is all, you know, friendly, and then Avery Brooks, who wasn't yet in his hawk mode, but he says, "We met in battle at Wolf 359," and the shock on Picard's face, the shock, you know, the sadness, the everything, and there's a furiousness on Avery Brooks' face that he literally took the wind out of Picard's sails just with that one line. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Such a great opening scene with
Mm-hmm.
him losing his wife during the battle.
Oh yeah,
and I mean they let him just be a powerhouse actor on the screen from scene one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You know.
Yeah.
And I always laughed at J.G. Hertzler's in that scene, you know, because he becomes such a big part of DS9 later that he plays that Vulcan captain.
Yeah, that's actually true. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. It's a great opening because I remember when the life pod or the escape ship craft leaves where he left his wife's body. Sisko is literally slumped down in his seat. He's literally slumped because his wife is dead. He's got his son, and you can see everything that has been taken out of him. And then you're right. Later on, they show him. I had no idea. You know, I posted in our group about how the Siskos mean so much to me for a lot of reasons. As a man, a black man, as a man whose father has been dead these 20 years. I had no idea because the record of children and parents on Star Trek is abysmal. I mean, with Worf, you never know where the hell his kid is because half the time it's like, hey, Worf, where's your son? I sent him back to Earth. My parents are trying to raise him. Then what's going on with your son? My parents feel they're too old to try to raise my son. The next thing he ends up on a Klingon ship. Like, what?
Right.
You know, Worf is a horrible parent.
Yes.
And then everybody else just has grief with their parent. Lwaxana gets on Troy's nerves. I think they actually have a good relationship, honestly. Of course, you've got Spock and his father, and then we find out Picard and his father, et cetera, et cetera. And so Star Trek could really do. And West End and Beverly, right? But
they have a fairly good relationship, though.
Yeah, they had a great relationship, but I didn't know what to expect, and you never know what to expect with kids. And so it really became a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And then they brought his father in, and that mattered because Sisko is probably the most human captain commander we've ever had in all of Star Trek, with the possible exception of Janeway. But he's the most human. And a few years ago, I read a poll of military officers where some science fiction magazine had done a poll of military officers, and they asked them which starship commander or which commander in Trek was the most realistic, and Sisko won.
Wow.
I think that's because he was the most commanding and forceful over the others.
Okay, well, I think Picard could be forceful. I mean, you're right. Like when Sisko, like when you're in trouble, you're in trouble. You don't want Sisko mad at you. And I love those
like
scenes
Sisko had
where
that military
Yes.
Yeah, I love those scenes where Sisko reminds you who's in command of this place.
Oh boy, does he ever?
Yeah, yeah. If Sisko's your boss or your dad, man, you don't want to make him mad.
But I think that was why he won. Is because you're right. Because he could be, your commander, but then he could basically lose his temper and dress you down. But then he could go in and literally kiss his teenage son, on the cheek. And next thing you know, he's got like a cool dashiki vest on, and he's cooking jambalaya.
Right. Yeah. And when I was a kid, I didn't know that was unusual. I was 12, 13, 14 years old. I didn't know that it was unusual to have, a loving relationship on screen between a black man and his son. I didn't know that it was unusual for a black man to be the main character on a sci-fi show. He's just one of my Star Trek heroes. You know,
Awesome.
I had a Cisco toy. I had Cisco on my magazines. I had, you know what I mean? Like he was just one of the Star Trek heroes. And I didn't know that was noteworthy at that time because I was 12, 13, 14 years old. And then you get older and realize that had never happened before. You know?
It was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm thrilled that it was. 'Cause I mean, it's obviously very important for, you know, people of color to see themselves on the screen. But I think it's very important too for little white boys to look up to Black heroes on screen too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
And also things now that's so funny when we look at shows like Discovery, whether we like shows like that or not, like you said, Charles, things that now don't seem as unusual or groundbreaking or weird, because not just the fact that it was a Black person, because, you know, we got a lot of Black commanders now, not just that it was a Black person, but also that you can have a commander who shows more emotions. Now, we know Discovery sometimes may go a little too far with the emotions, but as you said, a father who could be a commander who could be a loving father and a loving son, and then again, a loving husband.
Right.
And so that lets you know that you didn't have to be like the Kirks and the Picards, who were pretty much always going, I'm so lonely. I'm like, well, there's this lady and this lady and this lady. Well, but I can't. And they're just lonely. And that's kind of sad, you know? Yeah. So I think it was great to show that.
Yeah, I think so too. And it makes him so much more of a well-rounded character. And I've said it before, but DS9, like, it's full of families. You've got the O'Briens, you've got the Nogs or the Quarks, you know, whatever. I don't know if they have a surname. You know, you've got, you know, Dax and Worf becoming a family. You know, you've got all these different things going on the show, and other Star Trek shows just don't do that. You know, you don't have groups of families like you do on, you know, I think that adds so much to it. Like we were watching a DS9 the other day, and I don't remember which one it was, but it was, you know, O'Brien and Bashir flying to a planet, and they're like just 5 minutes just talking about O'Brien and Keiko, just talking about their life like you would with a coworker, but giving that space to the characters and giving them something to talk about and letting them talk about it. That's not the plot.
Yeah, that was about to say, it was not part of the plot. It's not world ending, and it's not a clue as to what's going to happen in this next.
Yeah, it's just what's going on with O'Brien.
Yeah.
And that just makes them just feel like people. And they're people. Absolutely. Like, that's the great thing about DS9 to me, is that it feels like people in a place that I want to spend time with. You know, and that's something that I think maybe a casualty of these newer shows having such shorter seasons and being so serialized, but every conversation is about the plot, and every conversation is very serious about the plot. And there's never just like, hey, what's up, man? You know, what's on your mind? You know,
there's a little bit of that in Lower Decks.
Lower Decks gets some of it, but like
Strange New Worlds is trying to get that kind of formula, kind of sort of like they hang out in his ridiculously huge cabin and he cooks for everybody.
Where his cabin's bigger than the bridge.
Yeah. But I mean, that's one thing about DS9 I just love, is just putting it on and you just feel like you're back on DS9. You know, and I mean, in DS9 they were able to develop their own mythology. You know, with it has its own history, its own prophecies, its own religions. You know, like there's so much to DS9.
So I always hesitate to say, yeah, we watch DS9 every night when we go to sleep, so like it puts me to sleep. And I always hate saying that, but I think it's because I get to feel like I'm part of that world. So it's, I mean, I've always said it's comforting because it's familiar and I don't have to think about it. But at the same time, it's like I'm in that world. Okay, great. I'm in this other world that's not this world, and it's an awesome world, even if a lot of the time there's terrible things happening.
And I'm sure I'm sure most of the people listening, most of them know this, but what I find so amazing about this is, Charles, you said, as DS9 became its own thing, and it only became this way because of Voyager. Because the powers that be at the network, also including Rick Berman and wasn't Berman and Branyan Braga, the showrunners. Yeah, the showrunners and the keepers of the Star Trek legacy at that time, they would have enforced a much more TNG type show on Deep Space Nine for all 7 seasons, including the things that we talk about, which is the more, I would say, the more morally and ethically rigid type of Starfleet captain we've always seen, instead of the shades of gray that we saw in Deep Space Nine. And literally what happened was, when Voyager came on board and they had to turn their attention to Voyager, two things happened. One, they didn't have enough time to be worried about Voyager and Deep Space Nine. And the other thing, which I always find is incredibly ironic, is Deep Space Nine became what pains redhead people the redhead stepchild, because Voyager was going to help launch this new network, right?
Mhm.
And it was the UPN network. And so Voyager, in a lot of ways, became what they thought was they thought it was going to be their bread and butter. And so they kind of focused more on Voyager as the quote unquote flagship. And they just kind of said, whatever, they left Deep Space Nine alone. And that allowed Ira Stephen Bear and the others to craft something different, because the other guys weren't paying attention to them. Right. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten the Deep Space Nine that we got. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just such a great show, and it's so much fun to watch. It's fascinating that, like, there's so much story to DS9. Like, I remember when Game of Thrones came out, and everyone was excited about Game of Thrones because it was this big, expansive show with all these different characters. And I felt like, well, DS9 was my Game of Thrones back in the 90s. That if you want to do serialized Star Trek, maybe continue the storylines of DS9. And it's interesting now that you've got this big next gen reunion going on, and you've got 7 of 9 on it, and you've got basically a Voyager sequel in Prodigy, but nothing for DS9. DS9, they had an episode of Lower Decks with a couple of DS9 characters, and they went back to DS9. But there's not been, I mean, I've not heard any rumblings about a continuation or a sequel to DS9.
Only in books, and I've got a good friend of mine, Tyrone Reedy, shout out to Tyrone, who has bought me for Christmas gift the recent comic books that deal with Cisco. There's a whole storyline about, I don't think this is a copy from Marvel, folks, but there's a whole storyline about, basically there's a god killer. There's a god killer being in the galaxy, and that god killer is going out killing all beings that are considered gods or have powers on that level. So that person would be going after people like the prophets, the Metrons, the Organians, and so forth. And so Cisco, there's a whole story with Cisco. Beverly Crusher's on the ship with Cisco. But so I've seen the stories continue in books and comics, but you're right. In terms of live action, nothing. And I sometimes can't tell, have they approached people like it? Well, Avery Brooks is the only person I can see maybe not wanting to come back, because he's Avery Brooks. I mean, he might be like, you're playing his piano and just say no. Play the piano the whole time and say, I don't want to come back. But other than that, I'm not really sure what the lack of interest is. Do you think it's because, despite everything, they feel like it doesn't lend itself to the kind of action and pew-pew that they want?
How is that possible?
Yeah,
it has the most pew-pew of any Star Trek.
Yeah,
I agree, unless they do another war. So I wonder if they feel that way sometimes. I don't know. It's weird because, like you said, even Voyager I hear more talk about than I do Deep Space Nine about some kind of...
Because there was that whole What We Left Behind documentary that Ira Stephen Bear did that was even in theaters.
Right.
Which
was crowdfunded, though. Like, it wasn't like Paramount funded that. That was crowdfunded.
Oh, really? I didn't realize
that.
They
had to crowdfund it, and they had to crowdfund to get. And there was like the stretch goals to get enough money to license the clips to put in HD.
Oh my
God! They could have, that wasn't like a Paramount thing, but I mean, they with like Discovery, they seem like they've wanted to do, especially early Discovery, like a Star Trek Game of Thrones. Like a very sort of Game of Thrones. It seems like if you want to do a Star Trek Game of Thrones, like get Ira Stephen Bear on the phone.
Yeah.
And
he's already done that.
And all those guys from DS9 went on to, like, Ron Moore's making For All Mankind right now. He made Battlestar Galactica. Like, those guys were all over sci-fi shows of the last decade.
Absolutely.
Any of them could bring back DS9, and even if it wasn't
anything like that,
even if it wasn't DS9 Part 2, but it was like a storyline involving Bajor and Cardassia and the Dominion, and you could follow these characters in a big Game of Thrones style story where they intermingle and they interact and so forth. You know what I mean? Like, you could do something like that with the DS9 universe. That I'm just it's just shocking to me that, I guess it's not shocking because who would ever expected any of these things to be happening at all, but it's just it's striking to me, I should say, that like we're coming off the big Voyager sequel with Janeway and then getting ready for the big next gen sequel that includes 7 of 9, and it's like, hey, where's Kira? I want to see more Kira. She's in one animated episode, but I mean, Nana Visitor can still play Kira.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then wouldn't we get Wouldn't we get Ro if we went like soon after? Because didn't Ro return to Deep Space Nine at some point?
In the books, but they don't necessarily have to follow the book continuity. I mean, I'd love to get Ro regardless. I'd watch a Ro and Kira buddy story, just those two.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
They've said that we're going to see some DS9 stuff aside from just Worf in Star Trek Picard season 3. So I'm hopeful that it's going to be something meaningful.
Yes.
You know. But I don't know. I would love to see more of DS9. It's such a rich world in of itself. But if they're going to do it, they need to do it right.
Yeah.
But I think Star Trek's getting to the point now on television where they could do it right. I don't know if I would have trusted them in 2018 to do it right.
No.
But now it seems like they're getting to a point where they're handling the lore better and creating new things.
People who have the interest to put in the effort to think about these things and are actually fans and not just writers.
Sure.
And also, sorry, Charles, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, and there was a lot of turnover. The first few years of the CBS All Access shows, they had a lot of trouble getting the showrunners, the right people in place they could keep. So that doesn't help any show having,
especially when it's like the 4th episode of the 8-episode season.
Right. Anybody's job, if you have a new boss every 6 months, the work's going to suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I think too, and I think one thing they would learn, because I think it's critical, and not to criticize Discovery, is to do a little bit more show don't tell, because one of the things Discovery has done and still has a tendency to do is they get kind of heavy-handed on their messages. And you have to kind of let the messages speak for themselves a little bit more subtly, and you really need that with Deep Space Nine. I mean, you have obvious episodes where they have obvious messages, but Deep Space Nine was actually not a show that was message. It was not message heavy on that way. I mean, you had things like Far Beyond the Stars and so forth, but it's not as heavy as I think that Discovery.
Yeah. I mean, not every week, but it could be like Far Beyond the Stars is a good example, and the one where with Dax's wife came back, things like that certainly were, but it wasn't week to week. Do you think Avery Brooks would come back?
I love Avery Brooks like you wouldn't believe, but he's weird, and I say that, and I mean that
so
weird like. Yeah, and that's weird, like a creative genius weird. I could see him not wanting to be bothered. I could see him just not wanting to come back because he's happy doing whatever he's doing.
Right.
Isn't he like, weren't we listening to like Avery Brooks's new
That wasn't new. That was from like 2008. She's talking about is I found several tracks from Avery Brooks' 2008 album on YouTube. And it's called Here. And so I was playing it for Frank, and I played it for her without telling her what it was, and you recognize his voice.
I recognized his voice. I was like, is that Cisco?
Yeah, and he's got a great voice.
Oh yeah, professor of music at Rutgers University. So he's the real deal. Years ago here in Atlanta, there used to be a thing called the Black Arts Festival.
Okay. And
it was a celebration of Black and Afro-American, Afro-Caribbean culture. And it was a series of events all across the city of Atlanta. I think it's every once every 2 years. And I mean all across the city of Atlanta. And there would be artist markets, and there would be special movie screenings, and there would be things like I
went to one of those artist markets when I was a kid.
Yeah, and it would be
going on for like decades or something.
Absolutely, because it was going on back when he was on Deep Space Nine, and there'd be like special concerts at the First Center for Georgia Tech. And one year, and there was always a master of ceremonies to open, and because the Black Arts Festival, like any event, like the Olympics or something, there'd be an opening ceremony. Right. And the one year we went, Avery Brooks was the master of ceremonies. He was the official host for the Black Arts Festival for Atlanta. He was here for over like 2 weeks, and there was this really cool opening ceremony at Morehouse College that started out with a circle of Native Americans sitting and beating drums, and then it expanded out, and then Avery Brooks showed up in all white, being Avery Brooks. Of course he did. And he was just so cool, and he sang. And yeah, the man has an incredible singing voice, and he was just really great. He was there all week long. And I think the next time I saw him was at the Dragon Con, which I think we were all at the Dragon Con, where he started singing Alamo Ring when people asked him, was there any episode of Deep Space Nine he didn't like? He starts singing from Move Along Home. But yeah, he's an odd creative bird. And for those who have never seen Avery Brooks literally just in an interview, It is wild because when he'll talk and he'll say, yes, and nobody expected it. Yes, and he's doing this. I remember I saw one time one of the interviews where they had the whole cast and they all love each other. You can tell they all love each other, but they were all trying not to laugh just because of the way he was. He goes, and this and that. So I could see somebody go into his house and he does that thing again where he's playing the piano and says, well, I'm not really interested. Or I can see him playing the piano for 5 minutes and says, I'll consider it. You just never know with that guy.
Maybe they could talk him into coming back to play Benny Russell. And Benny Russell could be like the narrator for the show.
There's a thought.
Yeah, that might get his attention.
There's a great thought.
Yeah.
Have like the storyteller with Jim Henson, where there's that opening.
Right.
Not
I thought
like
you were back to the DS9 episode.
No.
I was like, no, not like that.
I will tell you what
like where he's like the opening and he does this whole thing of I have this great idea and it's about this.
We know what narrators are.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what he wouldn't want to come back for. In the books, and I haven't read the books, but I've read up on the books. In the books, and again, we don't know if the books are ever canon.
No.
In the books, they take Sisko's character through a whole series of crazy crap that ends up with him like getting on a starship, becoming estranged from his wife, divorcing his wife, Cassidy, and then later on getting back together. And I will tell you that what you're talking about earlier, Charles, the reason that Sisko's relationship with his father and his son was as good as it was is because Avery Brooks literally insisted from day one, as a black man, I am not going to play another black man who's an absent father. I'm not going to play a black man who's never going to have a romantic interest. I am not going to play a black man who abandons his son. Because as you may know, the original idea when the show was first scripted back in the early days was Sisko was going to die in the last episode.
Right.
And Avery Brooks pitched a fit. And like, oh, you're going to go out as a hero and blah, blah, blah. And he said, I will not have a black man abandon his son. Yeah, but you're going to die a hero. I ain't doing it. I'm not doing it. And so I know that he would not come back and want to play that segment of time where Sisko divorces his wife and is not around his son. I know he will like, nah, I ain't playing that crap. He's not going to, he will only play when he comes back. So, but I think a Benny Russell angle is awesome, and I think he'd get interested in something like that. I think especially if he's kind of like a narrator or something like that.
Right. So, what do you think about Sisko leaving to be with the Prophets at the end of DS9?
I was always okay with it if he came back soon, and then when I read the books, I realized he was gone for a while. Because remember, I forget, did he say something like, "I may be back tomorrow, I may be back yesterday"? Right. Excuse me, something weird like that. Because literally, he could go out and fight for like 5 years and show up like 5 minutes later. You know, like he could say, "Hey Jennifer, I'm going to work," and come back like an hour later. He's all beat up in hell, and he's been gone for like 6 months, but he just came back into this hour. You know, he's gone for a long time in his subjective
like a time traveler's life.
Exactly. So I was okay with that if he wasn't going to be gone for a long time.
Yeah, the thing that throws me about it, and even at the time when it aired, was that you've got Cassidy and the baby. You know what I mean? So it really felt out of character for Sisko to be like, well, I'm going to go be a prophet now. You know,
no.
If it was just Sisko and Jake, I think it would have worked better because you could have really played up the angle where Jake's a man now.
Yeah.
And maybe Jake got a job on the other side of the galaxy and Sisko's having to deal with that. That's part of being a parent is that eventually your kids are going to go off to live their own life. And now what? Once you're an empty nester,
you have a wife and a baby. Like,
right.
That's why when you said he divorced his wife, I was like,
no,
he would not do that. He would have gets the prophets to marry her.
That was crazy. Why I quit reading the books. They destroyed DS9 and built a new star-based DS9. And I was like, no. If it's not Tarek Noor, I don't care. You know, exactly. But also, I don't. A lot of the book continuity, I don't care for a lot of this character choices either. So, but that's so it goes. That's the thing with making decisions. Is
there was an Irish you compare to be like, that's how it goes.
Right.
Something else about Deep Space Nine, and again, that nowadays may seem not as radical as it was then, but Deep Space Nine had a really, especially for the time, it had a deep pool of women who had significant roles and were significantly important. Because before that, you had the history of Number One in the original series, and you had Dr. Crusher and Deanna Troi and TNG, who were never really as utilized as well as they could have been. And then, of course, you end up with Captain Janeway. But with Deep Space Nine, to have a first officer or the second in command, which was Kira, as a woman, and no super obvious eye candy like they did. Now, obviously, Dax was that was her appearance was kind of played up, but Dax was a full-fledged officer. She was a trill, and even though a whole bunch of guys fell in love with Dax, she wasn't portrayed the way, say, a Seven of Nine was, or Deanna Troi, who wore super tight dresses for years until Jellicoe, props to Jellicoe, told her to put a uniform on. And so you had women who were absolutely competent. You had a woman who could command the station when he wasn't there, and a woman who had her own voice in Kira. You had Dax, who was a science officer. And I love the way they were portrayed. I think that show, and again, I think if Berman and Braga had been running the show, I don't know if these things would have developed the way they did, because it really feels like they just did they found good actors and they just said, okay, if you can do this, run with it. Run with it.
And now, I mean, that's something we were talking about just recently on the show, and Alan was pointing out that the women of Next Gen were in caregiver roles. You've got a counselor and you've got a doctor. Now, they did try with Tasha Yar. It's not their fault that she left the show, but I mean, we should give them credit for having the security chief in the season 1 being a woman. But yeah, on DS9, I mean, the Kira and Dax could beat up the male characters. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? And now, like, they're both attractive people. But like you said, they weren't in cat suits.
Exactly.
You know? They weren't in cleavage-bearing outfits. They were in regular uniforms. Now, Kira's uniforms did get tighter as the show went along. But, you know, she didn't start off the show in a cat suit or in like a little cleavage jumpsuit. You know, they were just given regular uniforms like anybody else would be.
Right.
Yeah.
And you even had, even though she was 100% never used well, other than that one episode, which unfortunately is the one episode where she wasn't herself, but Keiko O'Brien was also, well, she could have been a stronger character. I think they used her too much to kind of show that kind of goofy marital thing between her and O'Brien. Like if I heard her one more time complain about him leaving the socks lying around or something like that. But she had potential. Now I know that Rosalind Chow herself was one of those people who she was often off doing other shows and plays and stuff like that. So sometimes it wasn't that they didn't write her into the thing, but when they did write her into the script, I don't think they utilized her well enough. But I always thought she's a missed opportunity. But then you look at the other women, like, even though she wasn't in the show much, Kaiopaka, or, well, there's Wynn, of course.
I love
strong woman.
Wynn.
Yeah, she's a strong woman.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, it's great to have such a great antagonist, because so many of the antagonists on DS9 are men. That you've got Kaiopaka, who's, and I mean Kai Wynn, who's, she could scheme her way with any of them, you know.
She could scheme her way around all of them
until there's that stretch in season 7 that I don't care as much for, where they kind of played Kai Wynn for a fool. But but she's such a great character, though, and just one of those characters you just love when she's on screen, even though you hate the character. You know.
Yeah,
she's great, and I think Wynn and Kira and Apaka remind me of the other thing, the great thing that I love about Deep Space Nine. And again, I don't know if this is one of those, I often ask myself, the WWGD, what would Gene do? And we know that not only did Gene Roddenberry believe in a utopian future, but if you look at Gene Roddenberry and what he believed in between the original series and by the time of Next Generation, he really went full tilt to the utopian future. He hated Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country, because it had Federation officers who were part of a conspiracy. He said that never would have happened. As we know, he hated the concept of the Federation having a cloaking device, which I think is probably the silliest thing in all of Star Trek, because he said it just wasn't morally, it wasn't right. We wouldn't do something like that, which is insane. No. And as we know, he was the one that made it so difficult for them to write conflict on the Next Generation, because he just felt that kind of conflict between people didn't exist anymore. So I know that had he lived and been in control of it, Gene wouldn't have let TNG go to the places it went, because if you think about it, not just the stuff that Cisco did, and these are complicated things, but Kira was a terrorist. End of story. She might have been right. And even saying that, you got to be careful nowadays, but the end of the story is Kira planted bombs. She killed people. She killed civilians. She probably killed children, Cardassian children at some times. She probably killed Bajoran people. who were she felt collaborators. And then we find out, spoilers, as you said earlier, Kyle Paka. We found out that Kyle Paka was responsible for the deaths of a whole bunch of people because she made a morally gray decision.
Right.
And then you get Wynn, who I still contend was not pure evil, which is why I think what you said, Charles, is always great, is antagonist, not villain, because that's a very important distinction. Because I still believe at some point in time, Kai Wynn had some kind of faith, because she was tortured by the Cardassians. She did believe. Now, she may have always been ambitious. And so I think you have some of the most morally great people in all of Star Trek. And I know Gene would have hated that, especially for the Starfleet officers. But to me, I think it's one reason you can relate to the show, because they feel so much more human. They don't feel like paragons of virtue. They feel like humans, even when they do stuff that you think is kind of horrible.
Yeah. And the Gene of the Next Gen era may not have approved. I think the Gene of the 60s would have. Because I think that DS9 feels like it has its roots more in the original series. And I remember The Making of Star Trek, which is a book that I love. And they have the original Star Trek pitch at the beginning of that book. And in that Star Trek pitch, written by Gene Roddenberry, it says the year could be 1995. It could be 2995. But it's far enough in the future that galaxy travel is established, but near enough to now that humans are the same. I'm paraphrasing that because I don't remember the word for word. And that's the key, I think, to Star Trek, is that they've got to be people. Right. You know, and that's the great thing about DS9, is that they're people. You get this, and more than any other show, I think you get to see people who have full rounded lives, but you get to see them going through things, and you see them changing over the course of the show. And that's really the strength of the show to me, is that you get to live these experiences with these people. And you know, it just feels more real, and it feels, for me, more engaging because of that.
Absolutely. I was reading a Facebook group discussion the other night in a Star Trek group where people were going back and forth. And it was about, you remember the episode where Bashir and O'Brien crash land on that planet with Jim Hadar, and the commander no longer needed to Ketracel White, and he wanted to get his squad genetically engineered, so they no longer get the Ketracel White. And the debate was, the commander says, if you help me free the Jim Hadar to Ketracel White, they no longer have to do the founder's bidding. And O'Brien, the military man, is like, F that. Hell no. If we free you from the Ketracel White, we just unleashed a greater threat on the galaxy. But Bashir, as a doctor, my job is to heal them. And long story short, at the end of the show, O'Brien completely scuttles the work that Bashir had done, where he possibly could have cured them. And this Facebook group was having this huge debate, because they were saying, half of them were saying, that was not a Gene Roddenberry ending, because O'Brien and that show ended on a note of cynicism, which Gene Roddenberry never would have ended on. He didn't give Jim Hadar the benefit of the doubt. And I'm on the other side. And I thought it was so great, because it was such a morally complex discussion.
Yeah.
And that symbolizes Star Trek, Deep Space Nine to me.
That's one of the few times Miles was wrong.
Well, the great thing about Miles is that he's an everyman. He could be wrong all the time.
Right.
Miles to me feels like a dude who's in Star Trek more than anybody else. He's just some guy trying to go to work, and he's stuck in a Star Trek, you know?
And I love the way they did little things that Miles, like, you notice how often his sleeves are rolled up?
Right.
Like he was really working.
My wife's on my back. I can't fix this machine. The boss is giving me a hard time, and now I've been captured, and I'm living in a virtual reality world. I'm having a terrible time.
I have the memories of being in prison for like the last 5 years. No one cares.
And I watch
I'm not going to wipe it from my memory, even though.
And what was that? I watch my alternate reality time self die, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. All right. Well, we're coming up on our time. I mean, I think we all love DS9, and I'm thrilled that it's getting the accolades that it's getting. You know, I think you hear less and less of people who don't like DS9 now. You know, DS9, I think people have reevaluated, and I think the fact that it's on streaming helps tremendously. So if you happen to have listened to this past hour and you've not watched DS9, do it, because it's great.
Yes.
Yeah. And don't
it's
skip the first 2
reason to
seasons.
get Paramount Plus.
Right.
Yeah. Don't skip the first 2 seasons.
No.
I'm not a big believer in skipping. Go ahead and power through the first couple of seasons, because they're not bad. They're not awful. By no means are they awful at all.
Yeah. And like Tuck always says, but after you power through the first 2 seasons and then you watch all of it, you're going to be like, I want to go watch that first episode of those first 2 seasons again. And then you're like, wow, that was Bashir.
And I will say, we were joking on the thing. I said I had to get this in. It is absolutely true. As much as people joke about it, it is absolutely true that when Avery Brooks is allowed to grow his beard and shave his head, the show changes, but he changes. I've actually done side-by-side comparisons. He does walk differently.
He looks visibly more comfortable in his own skin after he goes all Cisco. Once he goes full Cisco, the show just flies, man.
Yeah, and I actually researched, and it turns out the truth of the matter literally was this, and this alone, is the studio was concerned that bald head and a beard he was still going to be seen as Hawk from Spencer for Hire, and they didn't want the association, so he gave in.
The funny thing is I don't see Star Trek and Hawk crossing over that much. Obviously, yes, a little, but I don't see them crossing over all that much.
I don't see how seeing him as Hawk is a bad thing at all.
Right. Agreed.
All right, Keith, where can people find more of you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, primarily the ESO Network Facebook's group, and of course, Earth Station Trek. Well, I'm going to be trying to post a lot more because I never sleep.
And how about us, Veronica?
FeltNerdy.com.
And
Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
Yep. And if you're in the Atlanta area, come out and see us on January 27th. That's at Metropolitan Studios for Jen and Jack's Happy Hour. Or you can see us at the Puck and Puppet Show at the Village Theater on February the 11th. We've got other shows that we're in the works. We're sort of negotiating for, so we've got more things coming up. So just go to feltnerdy.com, which will redirect you to our Facebook page until we finish.
For now.
We're working on a website, but it's not done yet. But go to feltnerdy.com and join our Facebook page so you can follow along with where we're going to be, because we have a lot of fun. And we're actually going to be appearing on an upcoming episode as Earth Station Trek. We all guest starred, or most of us guest starred,
not me, on
an episode of the Cosmic Pizza podcast that I think is going to be out early February. I'm not sure, but we will let you know, because we had a great conversation with those guys. And we had a lot of fun.
Great discussion. Yeah. And we'll be doing it again soon.
That's right. Now, Veronica, do you have a closing for us?
You best hope you don't see me again at Wharf 359.
Did you say Wharf 359?
Yes. What was it supposed to be? Wolf?
Wolf 359.
Yeah, that was not a quote from DS9.
Perfect ending.
Now that was Hawk.